Hello and welcome to the January edition of Mytech U. Today we are going to discuss a very hot topic, which is Windows 10. And we're getting a lot of questions from our customers and just the general IT world in general. When should we upgrade? What's new? What should we be concerned about? So today we're going to be talking about a lot of those things and why it has populated the consumer side, the home-based versions, but how it has not yet proliferated throughout the business world. But we'll be talking about a lot of those drivers. So today we're joined by Philip Holtz, who's actually going to be leading the presentation. My name is Nathan Austin, by the way. I'll be moderating. We also have one of our sales engineers, which is Andy Brogan. He is here. He's actually been running Windows 10 on his machine for, I think, a month or two now. Andy, I think, is that right? Yep, that's correct. And so he'll be able to also give us some experiential feedback depending on some of the questions that we may get from the audience. So let's touch on this, a couple of logistics. This is being recorded, and we will have it on our website within 24 hours. Please use the control panel at your side. All attendees are muted, but if you have any questions, by all means, please put your question in the questions section, and we'll do our best to either answer those questions throughout the presentation, and if we're not able to get to all of them, we'll answer them offline afterwards. So with that, without further ado, Philip, introduce Philip Holtz, who's our one of our chief engineers. He's our solution architect, who'll be leading us. So, Philip, take it away.
Hey guys, welcome. Thanks for having me again. Great to be here. Again, Windows 10, when should we upgrade? Just kind of highlight of how we're going to go through this. We're going to talk a little bit about Microsoft's position and the actions they're taking. Obviously, this is their software, and they're putting a lot of marketing in that. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about the offer of a free upgrade from Microsoft to move to Windows 10. We're going to get a little bit into some technical details, not too deep into the really techie stuff, but there are some caveats that we need to understand about really the consequences of Windows 10 and the preparations we need to make. And then Nathan's going to take over again and kind of walk us through the major steps as to how you would plan a migration to upgrade your existing infrastructure from an operating system that's not Windows 10 to an operating system that is Windows 10. So starting out, what is Windows 10? What's Microsoft's position? Straight from their website, the best Windows ever is here. They're talking about a lot of new features in terms of the features that are available. We have some new Cortana, some new browsers, some better integration with the rest of the world, some new security features that involve more biometrics, more integration of identity control, and better cloud integration, again, on that theme of better and more connected than ever.
Yeah, Philip, just to interject, yep. Since many people probably don't know what Cortana is, do you want to at least articulate that?
Oh, sure. Sure. So Cortana is one of the many changes to or reintroductions of a kind of an existing feature from other platforms integrating onto Windows 10. So Cortana is a speech-driven search engine similar to Apple's Siri, for example. It currently exists on mobile devices, and Microsoft at this point is bringing it into their operating system on the desktop as well.
Thank you.
So Microsoft's position is also everyone should upgrade now, right? This is there are a lot of motivations that Microsoft has that are their motivations to upgrade to Windows 10, which may or may not coordinate or correlate rather with your motivations or your business's motivations. So what are some of those? Microsoft, like many other players in the industry, has a legacy of charging a fee for software, which you can then use perpetually once you've paid the one-time entrance fee. And Microsoft, like everyone else in the space, has really recognized that a subscription model or a pay-as-you-go model is really a better way to deliver software all around. So they're certainly in the process, as we see, of changing their the way that they deliver software and the way they make it available to the end users, really moving towards a subscription model. Part of that is also something called Windows as a Service, which we'll talk about a little bit more in detail a little later. They really want to drive their cloud business. So the profit locations for Microsoft and other software vendors, again, is more in this cloud space of hosting applications and hosting data. And they've also opened themselves up, as they've seen over the last few decades, to a really wide range of products. We know about the Windows XP being kicked off support a couple years ago, but Windows 7 initially came out, almost 10 years ago now. So they have a very wide portfolio of products that they need to support and ensure compatibility between, and they have an interest in limiting the number of different types and versions of software they have in those compatibility matrix to support. So how is Microsoft making this argument for us? They're doing it with sticks and carrots, right? So they are in part encouraging people to make the upgrade. They're doing it, now straight through the desktop, through the Windows installer. This is kind of unprecedented in Microsoft world anyway, is that inside of the normal Windows update that's been there, they're now pushing the upgrade from whatever Windows you're on to Windows 10 as an update. They've also changed around some of the life cycle, or are calling upon some of the life cycle expirations for some of their other products, Windows 7, Windows Vista. There's some details there, but essentially they're limiting the support options that are available. And on top of that, recently in the news has been a discussion about CPU compatibility, about how in the future they're going to limit the computers that can run Microsoft Windows. The marketing piece indicates that future versions of Windows will only run on the latest hardware. So there's some call to actions there to encourage you to make the change. And then as the offer, or the carrot in this case, in addition to the features and the enhancements, they are giving it away. They're making an offer to upgrade to Windows 10 for free. So that seems compelling, and it's worth looking at. So as we go to the free upgrade offer, I want to talk about a little bit in details kind of what that is. There's some confusion that's been in the marketplace. Originally, Microsoft announced that it was for consumers, not for businesses, and then a lot of people scratching their head. And when you get through kind of the Microsoft marketing presentation, it's fair to note that Microsoft has never been particularly clear about their licensing models. But essentially, the upgrade offer is free for everyone. So I have kind of a little chart that indicates the version-to-version upgrades. The basic takeaway is that older versions, if you're still running XP or which you shouldn't be, but if you are running XP or Vista, this offer does not apply to you. Anyone running Windows 7 or 8 and all its various permutations are good to go. The one exception here, and this is the caveat of why the offer isn't free to business initially, was that those people who are running Windows 7 or Windows 8 Enterprise are not eligible for the free upgrade. That being said, almost everyone who has Windows Enterprise also has software assurance going along with it, and you are in fact eligible for Windows 10 through software assurance. So it's a little bit of a technicality saying that this particular free upgrade offer is not available to enterprises running certain versions of software, but those people who would probably all have alternate mechanisms of upgrading their licensing. So the call to action continues here with the stating that this offer is good through July 28th of this year. It's about 190 days from now, maybe. But one of the things to note is that they haven't really identified what it would cost after that. So it's left a lot of people scratching their heads, asking what happens after July 28th. What if I don't make the switch before then? How much does it cost me? And unfortunately, we don't really have any good information on what the cost would be on July 29th. Expect more from Microsoft as that date becomes more available. Coming in, it's important to note that the upgrade that is being offered is really just the licensing. So Microsoft is making an offer to say that you don't have to pay any additional money to get the new operating system. But there's still plenty of costs associated with any major software operating system upgrade. We know that there are application compatibility issues that need to be looked at. You may be in a situation where your accounting package that work just fine in Windows 7 or Windows 8 may need, that you originally acquired in 2013, may need to be upgraded to the latest and greatest version. Example of that would be like Peachtree. Peachtree is only supported on Windows 10 in the newest version. So there's some other consequences of upgrading your operating system that may lead into other applications directly in terms of compatibility. More importantly, inside of the costs are the fact that it's change, and change inherently has costs associated with it. Some of that is really involved in the testing, and the testing that we're going to need to do that Nathan will talk about a little bit in the future relates to your environment. Microsoft has guaranteed or is claiming compatibility with any software that used to run in Windows 7 will run in Windows 10. The caveat to that is, although the individual applications may work and run from a executable perspective, there's no real guarantee that the interoperation between different applications will continue to function as you expect it to in your environment. So it's really important to understand the consequences of that operating system upgrade before we move forward. Additionally, Windows 10 looks a lot different. I don't have a screenshot here, but Windows 10 looks different than Windows 7. It looks different than Windows 8. I think it's pretty good. I think they take the best of Windows 7 and Windows 8 and merge them together. But it's a change, and some users will pretty quickly adapt and may already be running the application or software at home and not have any issues. However, there may be other employees who really struggle with icons being in different places and the need to click in different ways. Many organizations like ours have process manuals that include how to perform certain actions within a defined workflow, and those may depend on how things are accomplished in one operating system, and as we change that, there may be a cost associated with changing some of those manuals.
Well, I'd like to just interject on that. One of the things that Microsoft did is they released this to any of the home user versions. So if you had a home version of Windows 7 Home or Windows 8 Home, then they pushed that, as you said earlier. Hopefully, and you kind of touched on it, hopefully that helps with the adoption as well as the beta testing. So hopefully there's a lot of beta testing going on, or there is a lot of beta testing going on with the home users who have received the product and their machines are already upgraded. And hopefully that does help then from mitigate some of the costs associated with training if people are running these versions at home. But of course that won't apply to everyone. So, but that was a good point you brought up. I just wanted to highlight that particular piece.
Yep. Other costs that we have is that although the Windows desktop's not the only computers that run on your corporate networks in general, there are going to be servers out there that perform Active Directory file sharing and run host applications. And there are some changes that need to be made to the server infrastructure to accommodate Windows 10 running in your environment in the right way. So that's going to require someone familiar with the server infrastructure to make those changes. We'll talk a little bit later about some of the things that we have to accommodate with those changes, but most of it comes down to GPOs or group policy objects and security policies, which are really the mechanisms we use on the server infrastructure to define how those corporate-owned PCs run. That all said and done, then there's actually a cost of performing the actual upgrades. Microsoft is indicating that many users would be comfortable with simply clicking on the button that they're handily providing to upgrade your operating system. And I think that's a really great feature for those folks in the home environment where they have one machine. I think it's not an appropriate way to upgrade machines within a corporate environment. We should be picking a date and time, and we should be performing upgrades with known version information. And so there's some associated costs with having your engineers or your support group or whoever performs your IT maintenance actually executing the upgrades. There's a variety of technical ways to do that, and part of the planning phase that Nathan will talk about is discussing what those might be. So as we move, understanding now a little bit better maybe why Microsoft wants us to do this, and what the offer that exists and potentially what the costs are, we have to ask ourselves when we want to upgrade. And if, when really comes down to, it's an inevitable factor. You will be moving to a newer Windows version at some point. So The question really isn't if, but it's when. And the carrot and the offer that Microsoft has provided is that if you want to take advantage of that free license upgrade, you have 190 days to do so, after which it may or may not be available. But as you make that consideration, that's, as we discussed, that's only one small part of the costs. It's also worth noting that Windows 7, the operating system that most businesses are still running on, is in extended support till 2020. Extended support is a type of support that indicates that Microsoft will continue to provide security patches and compatibility through that date on the existing deployed machines. The other thing worth noting is that although you only have 190 days to upgrade your Windows 7 and Windows 8 licenses to Windows 10, for practical matters, any new machine you're purchasing, if you get it through distribution or retail channels, is already coming with a valid license of Windows 10. So for example, anyone buying a new Dell, Lenovo, or HP off the current model line is already coming with a Windows 10 license. So the free offer really isn't something that you need to have available to you to get your Windows license, because the Windows 10 license, again, as I said, on new machines is already there. And then another consideration is if you rush quickly or move quickly without a proper plan in place, it's highly likely you'll actually experience higher costs as you perhaps unnecessarily accelerate the cost of deployment to take advantage of an offer. We do have some technical requirements that we need to consider. The technical requirements are pretty light. From the workstation side, we basically need to have an active, valid license, and we need to perform an upgrade on the operating system using the Windows Update feature. That's one mechanism. Another mechanism is using an offline tool, which is where a Microsoft IT professional can create an installer package offline that can then be run manually on each one of the machines to upgrade it. Or we can, in fact, take a machine as it exists, completely wipe it, and reinstall a clean operating system. Which of those is best for you is really going to depend on part of your environment, but those are all available options to perform that upgrade. As I mentioned earlier, the workstation isn't the only place we need to make some changes. We need to make some changes on the server side. So you need to have Server 2008 or better. For those still running Server 2003, that is fully out of support and should have been upgraded by now. So Server 2008 is a minimum requirement. We do need to make some minor changes to the Active Directory and the group policy structure in order to support the new group policy objects for security and management. So the technical limitations are pretty light. However, as we get to the meat of it, there's a lot of considerations that need to be made that need to be technically considered that aren't necessarily requirements. And what do I mean by that? Windows 10 operating system, for example, and part of trying to be a better player in a cloud and in an interconnected world, shares a lot more data with the outside world than previous operating systems have. So some examples of that is that out of the box, the default settings, Microsoft Windows 10 is going to be sharing Wi-Fi networks, Wi-Fi passwords, potentially your contact information. Any searches performed through Bing and Cortana are going to be sent to Microsoft, and including web traffic performed by the new web browser called Edge, which is going to report directly to Bing to quote-unquote enhance your web experience, which some of us think means provide ads. But there are some real issues regarding security and data sharing that are coming out of the OS upgrade. And for those of you who have data sharing or privacy policies with your customers, you really need to understand the consequences of making this change in the upgrade in the operating system. The old method of patching computers and providing service packs and critical and recommended patch is changing. Microsoft is moving towards a push method where instead of you volunteering to get patches, they will push them upon you. In fact, the default setting is that machines running Windows 10 will be updated automatically without involvement by the user in a push fashion. And that includes not just security patches, but also feature upgrades. So they will change the operating system for you. This is in alignment with the operating system as a service or Windows as a service functionality. So instead of having long-term view, instead of having a Windows 10, a Windows 11, a Windows 12, the plan as proposed by Microsoft is to have a Windows 10 November 2015 version, January 2015 version, January 2017 version, and so on. And the upgrades will be smaller, more incremental, but pushed down onto you. So with that change of the operating system life cycle, there's these different patching models. And the current branch is the name for the auto push, auto install mode, which is defaulted on all Windows 10 machines. There is a business version of the current branch, which is only available for those people running the professional operating system, which is most of your corporate machines. And it requires a Windows server to manage that, and it does that through some of those GPOs security updates that we discussed earlier as requirements. This hasn't existed for very long. This feature was made available at the end of November of last year, so it's less than 60 days old. So a lot of us in our industry who manage lots of different machines are still working on learning the consequences of some of these patching changes. That's part of the reason Mytech has been a little bit slow to push out new Windows 10 machines, is because we have not had good clarity on how we are to manage the patching and security of them. So more information has come out recently. The takeaway here is that the current branch for business is likely the mechanism that will be used moving forward to provide patching, and that's something that your IT administrator will need to be involved in to manage. There is another option, which some people might have heard of, called long-term service branch, or LTS, which was initially believed to be the equivalent to the traditional method of patching. That has not really divulged to be the case. The LTS branch is really designed only for those machines which need ultra-stable, non-changing operating systems. So think ATMs, kiosks, and other embedded devices. It also requires a more expensive, different type of licensing and isn't available to most folks under the current licensing model. So there's a lot to know and understand about that patching model, and I'm very open to taking questions at the end if people want to talk more about this. This is quite impacting on how security is going to be managed moving forward, but I'll leave that for others to pose questions at the end. And the last thing to talk about is that there's some browser compatibility considerations as well. Internet Explorer 11 is now officially the only supported Internet Explorer version inside of Windows 10. And the default browser is actually a new browser called Edge, formerly named Spartan, which is unrelated to Internet Explorer. Part of the provided rationale behind this is that the Internet Explorer is a very old web browser, and it's become a little thick and bloated, and Microsoft wants to provide users with a newer, better browser, and they thought it was time to go to a clean sheet of paper so they could provide the best web-based experience for you. And that's the Edge browser, which is, as I said, is the default browser inside of Windows 10. Unfortunately, it's young. It has a lot of compatibility issues. At this point, we're finding that most enterprise web-based applications are not supported by the Edge browser. So that could be part of your testing and mechanisms. Otherwise, you always have other browser options to look at. Firefox, Chrome, or Internet Explorer 11 are still all available and will still run on Windows 10, but certainly a change you need to think about. So those are some of the technical considerations we have regarding the Windows 10. And at this point, I'd like ask Nathan if he could walk us through a little bit some of the business justifications in that decision process and what the recommendation is for how to move forward.
Thanks, Philip, and everyone for participating and listening in here. We wanted to make sure we covered some of the technical components that are oftentimes are those things that happen behind the scenes that Microsoft would like to dictate. However, it has differing implications to each individual organization, right? As far as, I'm sure every one of us on this call or listening in the future has had a time where a Microsoft patch or update has broken something. And what Philip was talking about earlier is that, Microsoft is talking about, and their default is that when you go to Windows 10, they're going to dictate that when it happens, and you have no choice. So there are ways around that, but again, it requires a little bit more planning and consideration and thought to make sure that you have the environment that you feel best suits your organization. So with that said, there are some 3 steps we kind of identified here that to help your organization plan a migration and when and determine when is it appropriate to do that. So first and foremost, we're going to go through these 3 components, which is, basically we need to identify and create a list that are the key business functions, the key business applications, those things. We need to then make sure that we test the compatibility to understand how the impact of Windows 10 will have on that list. And then from that information, what considerations, what have we learned to help us plan a deployment that makes sense for us, for you and your organization. So Phil, if you go to the next one, we'll dig in here a little bit further on the creating a list. The key things that we wanted to touch on, first and foremost, critical applications, that's the obvious one, but also the integration points, meaning that if you have application A talking to application B, at least some of the testing that we've seen is that most likely the application A and application B will work just fine. It's just if application A has to send certain information to application B or there's an integration point there are some unknowns. It also could be that if application A, that you have you can click on it and actually spit out, say, a Word template or something like that. That it may be some of those type of integrations. Or it could be, then going to the next bullet is that the applications and integrating, and I put unique peripherals there in particular because, mainstream peripherals, it's just unlikely, at least from the testing that we've seen, that you're going to have any problems with them. But I would also maybe throw a little slash in there, say old peripherals. That's where you may run into some compatibility problems. So making sure that we include these components, that it could be barcode scanners, it could be card readers, if you're medical, kind of the insurance card readers that you have, just those kind of components that are peripherals, but yet they're key business functions for you. So keeping a list, getting that in the list. And then the last bullet is don't forget about, as Philip just articulated, with regard to Edge being the default browser and Internet Explorer 11 being the only supported IE browser in Windows 10, making sure that any hosted solutions you have, that you use a web browser to access them. And it might not necessarily be an application that you use all day, every day. Maybe it's just a web portal that's one of your vendors that you work with, but yet it's critical to your functions. So keeping those components in mind and adding those to the list so that you don't miss some key function or some key business criteria requirement when you're developing this list to create, from which you're going to test. Philip, any thoughts on this before we go to the next slide?
Sure. Yeah, I wanted to add that the web applications and portals is a tricky one, and it's oftentimes as folks go and we think about it, and we may say that, no, I only use this application, the web isn't really that important. As software is being developed and as software is moving forward in 2016, almost every major CRM has web-based components to it. It may be behind the scenes that you don't know about, where it calls and opens a web browser in the back end to pull some data or update a content list. So this is one of those things that the web application, web compatibility, browser compatibility is really not something that you can do strictly through an intellectual exercise. It's really critical that you test that so you don't find out after you've deployed that the price update feature inside of your quoting tool is really using Internet Explorer 8 in the background. So something like that. I just wanted to call attention that this is one of the things you really can't think through. You're going to need to be testing this as well. which gets to the next slide, I think, right?
Yeah, and I've got a couple questions that came in from the audience, so let's hit those really quick. One of the persons, when we talked about applications here, I know you mentioned Peachtree earlier. The question is, what are the requirements regarding, they specifically were asking about Peachtree, but I think it's probably a more general question. I know it's a specific question about Peachtree, but it's really making sure that you check all applications against the version compatibility. You want to elaborate on that real quick, Philip?
Sure. So there's a couple issues here. One is Microsoft can talk about what Microsoft supports and what it considers application compatibility. And the other side of that, fine and dandy, but if you call Sage, the manufacturer of Peachtree, for example, they may not agree that their application is fully compatible or supported or tested. So the vendors for your applications also have a say in whether or not your application is supported on Windows 10 beyond just being compatible. In this case, Peachtree specifically, and just to clarify, Sage 50, formerly known as Peachtree, last I saw requires the latest version, which is actually 2016.1. Teasing on to some we talked about inner application compatibility as well. To clarify, Windows Sage 50 10 is only supported when running Sage 2016.1. There are also known issues with compatibility and integration with the features between Peachtree and Microsoft Office, specifically the Outlook product. So there's also a combination matrix you have to look through in terms of which versions of Office you're running and which operating system. 2016 has some issues, 2013 is okay. So that's another good, really kind of a good case point where Microsoft will say that Peachtree works great on Windows 10, but Sage requires you to be running a certain version to support it.
Very good, thank you, Philip. And again, I think that applies. Like you said, it's a good case study for that question, but that would apply to nearly any other application of this checklist that we're talking about.
Sure.
Another question came in about peripherals. As far as peripherals compatibility with Windows 10, what is the youngest manufacture date you would recommend testing for, specifically relative to personal desktop printers and things like that? I know what I would say to that, but I'd rather let's to the technical question.
My answer to that be on for peripherals. If a peripheral was sold after Windows 10 came out, I would presume the manufacturer has an obligation to make sure that's compatible. Prior to that, I would be testing it. So I guess that says anything less than 6 months old should be okay. But it's worth noting also that peripherals, and specifically printers, as we talk about that, there's a difference between whether you're using a printer to simply, you have a desktop computer and it's connected to a printer, and when you hit the print button, the stuff comes out. That's pretty easy to design around and test for moving forward. But the more complicated situations where peripherals inside of a corporate issue revolve around maybe some of the advanced features of that copier scanner you have. Maybe the scan to email function doesn't work. Maybe there are security questions about using your copier to create PDFs and put them in a shared folder like you always have. There could be issues there. There could also be issues inside of integrated printing beyond just corporate correspondence. Anyone who's involved in a label printing, for example, some of the business processes inside of shipping that may require certain labels to be generated by your business line application and then output. Although the peripheral may technically be compatible with Windows 10, the workflow may not work the same way. Your labels may not come out at all, or maybe they don't look right. And those seemingly minor things could have major impact on the business.
Yeah, I think, Phil, thanks for sharing that point, because I think that's really, when you talk about the integration points and the key business functions, those are the kind of components, is that if there's a specific function, such as like what you mentioned with the shipping machine, it's not just a matter of saying, does this peripheral print? Does the entire workflow that I expect this peripheral to do, as far as the integration with application A and spitting out to a printer B, and making sure the label prints correctly, does that all work? And so it's identifying those key functions, and it's good because, as you mentioned, it's more likely that the complicated components and the integration components or the workflow components might not work exactly the way they were configured in the new environment, in the Windows 10 environment, versus the simple functions like just being able to print a piece of paper. So, and then the only thing that I would add to that comment, as far as how how old would you go, is if the device is such that if you were upgraded to Windows 10 and it doesn't work, and you ask yourself the question, well, does that matter to me, or would I just buy a new device, like a new printer, depending on the cost of that printer? If it doesn't matter in that regard, that would be something I'd say, well, and I'm not concerned about testing my home printer that I need to print remotely when I connect to the office. I mean, I can see some of those components, as long as you understand that if it doesn't work and you're okay with just being able to replace it, versus maybe holding off on a Windows 10 upgrade a little longer because you did test it and it doesn't work. So that would be my question there. But I think, Philip, you answered it very well with regard to, if the manufacturer released this product after Windows 10 was released, they have an obligation to make sure it's compatible. Otherwise, they probably will work for it for the most part if it's relatively close to that release date. But yeah, I wouldn't expect it. Thank you for that, Philip. I want to head over to the next slide. Perfect. So the next part is really, all right, now you've got this list, and it's not just the applications, but the integration points, any ways in which these different peripherals or applications will feed to other components of business workflow. Who is the person or the team that you're assigned to complete the test? And do you do this by department? Again, I think some of the team that may be defined, or the person or persons may be defined, that you may define, are going to be based on that list. If there's these critical functions that are in different departments for you, you may have to have different people from different departments doing testing that, and making sure that they're all giving that feedback and validating. Because I can tell you that if I was responsible, living over on the sales, kind of the sales and quoting and the business development side, we're responsible for testing components over on the technical side, I'd probably miss something, because there are certain key functions that they're used to doing on a day-to-day basis that I'm not, and I wouldn't necessarily know to test or know how to test. So keep in mind that there's definitely at least one, if not multiple people involved, depending on what parts of the test need to be completed. The next one is purchase or upgrade. This is I'm probably more inclined to say purchase, but I definitely think if you're willing to take the risk, upgrade at least one machine with Windows 10 in order to test. And that may be, you also, again, depending on the list, you may want to purchase or upgrade a machine in different departments depending on the functions that you may need to test, or the locations. You may have different locations you need to go to in order to test. So figuring that out as far as, again, whether or not you're going to have to buy a new or just upgrade a machine, and kind of roll the dice on hopefully the compatibility for at least that one machine, if you upgrade it, would work. So
in there, Nathan, it's probably
yeah,
worth mentioning that if you do the upgrade, actually, if you use the upgrade mechanism, Microsoft does allow for 30 days. Within 30 days, you can roll back to the previous operating system as part of the normal operating system. Whether or not that's going to be fully functional or not, 100% isn't guaranteed, but that may be another option, is to upgrade the machine, and you can always roll it back within 30 days to the previous operating system.
Very good, thank you. Then the browser compatibility. Philip already touched on this, how Edge is the default browser, but Internet Explorer 11 is the only Microsoft browser that's supported in Windows 10, and understanding the different applications that may use those functions. I know, Philip, you were going to, I don't know if you have anything more to add relative to the browser compatibility in this section.
The only thing that worth note is that the Internet Explorer 11 is the only supported Microsoft browser on Windows 10. Comes with an asterisk, which is, unless of course you're running an enterprise way and you really need to run something in Internet Explorer 10, we have some ways of doing that, but it's complicated.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's again, that is an interesting asterisk, but that requires some of the server-side policies that Philip referenced earlier. There are ways to enable it to be backwards compatible to Internet Explorer 10, but it's not. You can't be running actually in Windows Internet Explorer 10. It's a server-side policy that can be employed if you need to do it. So there's some like Philip said, complications in order to get that to work. The last thing is that, with browser compatibility, that I would be thinking about, or at least through your test, having the end user, the person testing, take a look at, and this came from feedback from folks, is regard to how favorites come across, or how, because that's, if there's one thing that we've learned about when people get a new machine or gets updated or rebuilt, if their internet favorites aren't there, if those shortcuts or links, those kind of things, making sure that understanding how that comes across or how that is a problem, because that can definitely impact the experience of your team when you go through the deployment, and making sure that you have your eye out for that and it's on your radar. And then, again, we already touched heavily on the application integration points. It's not just about, hey, I run this CRM software, I run this ERP software, this medical software. It's about what are the other components that it integrates with. And that's where you're more likely to experience problems, at least from what we've seen, that most applications out of the gate are working. It's just you get to some of the more complicated functions, and the nuances might have problems. And the other part that's, I think, that I wanted to, it's important for me to note, and I think it's always important because it gets overlooked, is as you're going through this, document the results and any nuances or problems. Some of those nuances might not be a big deal. Some of them might be a very big deal. So those are the things that we definitely recommend you doing in order to make sure that we can plan the deployment appropriately and understand the business drivers. So any final comments, Phil, before we go to the next slide?
No comments. Here's the next slide.
All right. Finally, again, plan the deployment. What results are desired, right? And this is really the business case. Why do we need to upgrade to Windows 10? At some point, that will happen, sometime before January 14th of 2020. But what are some of the reasons why you should do it? What it doesn't make sense for your organization to take advantage of the free upgrade in the next 190 days? Those kind of things. Making sure that what are the business reasons for doing this. The other thing is when we use the Peachtree as the example, or Stage 50, is that, well, what applications need to be upgraded? Are there some compatibility problems that we have that are known that we need to go to a different version? There's going to be some cost there. When does it make sense? Are there any other ramifications to upgrading the software? Are there other workflow that will be affected negatively if we upgrade the version? Because I'm sure that we're all familiar with upgrading versions of software can help fix things, but sometimes it breaks other things. So making sure that those are considerations that are part of the business requirements and that are thought through with regard to the deployment. Then finally, the upgrade the existing workstations, or do we just replace them when the appropriate life cycle time is at the 4 or 5 year mark? That's really the question that our recommendation, and Philip said this to me earlier, is that, hey, if it's a net new environment, hey, let's go Windows 10, right? Presuming all the applications are compatible and we can figure that out. But if it's net new, let's go Windows 10. But if it's not, which all of us are running existing organizations today, this is a choice you have to make as far as what makes sense depending on how the test came about. And finally, as Philip mentioned earlier, for instance, if you need to be able to use functions that exist only in Internet Explorer 10, those can be done, but there's server-side configuration required in order to be able to execute some of those things. Even to deploy Windows 10, there are server-side configuration that needs to be done in order to make sure that the patching is in the right places, as Phil discussed earlier. It's not just about one side versus the other. It's also server-side compatibility and security settings that need to be set as well. So there's a bunch there to plan the deployment. We're definitely here to help, of course, but those are some of the key considerations in order to plan your deployment, how it applies to your organization uniquely. So, all right. So, any comments on that, Philip?
I'd actually like, it looks like we have some questions coming in from the audience, and just looking at the time, I'd like to potentially take some of those. So why don't we move on here, and we'll take questions at the end.
Very good. Go to the next slide, which happens to be the question slide. Everyone else, I want to say thank you. I always want to be respectful of everyone's time. It is 12:01. We are going to continue the recording and continue the broadcast so we can answer some of these questions. But for those of you, just to let you know that we can sign off for now for the most part, but they said we'll answer some of these questions right now and continue the recording of the broadcast, and this will be uploaded. So, all right, with that said, if there's a question that came in, if you have a OEM Windows 7 version that's on 32-bit, can you upgrade to Windows 10 64-bit and be in compliance, or do I need to stay on 32-bit?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. There's a couple questions in there, actually, really. Is can I upgrade and will I be in compliance? So I think on the licensing issue, my understanding is you're going to be okay. Windows 10 doesn't differentiate from a licensing perspective between 32 and 64 bits. The path that you're proposing seems like something I would want to test. The reason someone would be running 32-bit operating system as opposed really should be running 64-bit operating systems if we're moving now. The pushing driver between running old 32-bit applications oftentimes revolved around backwards compatibility with previous applications, specifically 16 bits and real mode driver kind of things. So I would be real concerned about the compatibility of applications between the Windows 32 to the Windows 10 64-bit. But from a Microsoft's offer of a free upgrade, I think you're okay.
Very good, thank you. That's a great point on the, if someone's still running a 32-bit version, there's a good chance that there's a reason why they're running the 32-bit version, and so just arbitrarily going to 64-bit might not be, you'd want to test it, as you said.
Yeah, and to clarify the path, I don't know, it may be that you, from compliance perspective, you are licensed to use 64-bit, but I don't actually know what the upgrade installer package will do. Whether it move you to 32 and then you're eligible to wipe and replace with 64. So I'd certainly worth testing and checking out.
Thank you. The next one is, can we use Windows software upgrade services, or what is commonly referred to as WSUS, to update Windows 10, or do we need different software? I know that this is a question that we intentionally didn't go into in the presentation, but I know you're prepared to hit on this. So go ahead, Philip.
Sure. So the question, I could interpret the question two different ways. I'll try and answer both of them quickly if the original questioner can clarify and go into more details. Can we use WSUS to update Windows 10? Two ways to interpret that. One is, can I use WSUS to upgrade to Windows 10? Maybe. The second question being, can I use WSUS to continue to manage my Windows 10 patches? And the answer to that is kind of. As I said, the patch management mechanisms inside of Windows 10 have changed on their head. In general, old tools aren't compatible. WSUS can be used and is the mechanism for supporting patch management for those machines running on the LTS, or long-term service branch. However, the LTSB is probably not what you want to be running moving forward. So the question of can versus should probably comes up in that scenario.
Yeah, and this also, I think, falls into the bucket of, I think Microsoft is, this is their, I'm totally, this is opinion, it seems like they're trying to dictate a certain path, but that path is yet to be fully determined depending on how it actually plays out. So I would expect that depending on how the general world reacts and accepts some of this, Microsoft may also react and make some changes there too. Another question is, can you give examples of server-side applications that run in IE10 but not in IE11? I think that maybe we didn't articulate it effectively as far as what we meant by server-side policies relative to IE10 versus 11. So maybe you can elaborate on that, Philip.
So server-side applications that run on 10. Let me just talk generically about applications that run on IE10, not IE11. And that really has to do with the way the content is formatted, and oftentimes calls into question a lot of advanced, not that advanced, but what some might call advanced programming techniques beyond HTML. So any kind of scripting, JavaScript, any kind of advanced control, any use of ActiveX objects, things like this, can be very, very specific to a specific version of Internet Explorer. And typically what we find is it's not generally as much of an issue on websites where, like, it's a www site where the company's presence is dependent on that. It's usually based on back-end systems where it's the price feed that comes out of something, or it's a billing mechanism for submitting claims from a medical clinic through your EMR. Those are some of the places we see some of those compatibility issues.
and part of that, just to make sure we also answer the other piece, is that the way in which you can enable IE10 backwards compatible functionality, it's my understanding, Philip, that in order to do that, you can't install IE10, and in order to use some of the features inside of Internet Explorer that could enable that backwards compatibility, it's a server-side policy that needs to be employed in order to enable something like that. Is that an accurate way to describe that?
Yeah, it works out like this, and I haven't done extensive testing on it, so I'm making no promises here. My understanding is that the actual executable bits that run Internet Explorer 10 are still inside of the executable for Internet Explorer 11 or something like that. However, in the past, you were able to click a box that says compatibility mode to run the previous versions. Moving forward, that ability is being limited, if not deprecated entirely inside of the IE. However, as I understand it, there remains a mechanism where through a group policy object pushed down from the server side, you can create a class of websites in the same way you do in your security settings with intranet, internet, and trusted. You can add a new one called enterprise, which allows you to add through group policy specific sites into the enterprise security group, which will subsequently force the IE10 bits to run. That's what I understand. Sounds like it needs to be tested in a real-life scenario in someone's real-life business problem.
Yes, thank you for that elaboration. It can be done, but that's why we said it in the presentation. We left it to it can get complicated. So, and definitely something that ought to be tested. So, I think that is all the questions that were submitted in offline. So I think we're good. So with that said, I go to the last slide, Philip, real quick. Just at least has our contact information for the sake of the recording and for everyone watching. Feel free if you have questions to contact us, and we're happy to help. And the overall idea is that we want to be able to. It's the upgrade itself, as Microsoft said, might be free, but all the peripheral components that need to be double checked to make sure that your business will still function the way you need it to after that upgrade definitely has some costs, which we hopefully we raised awareness today. So. And that you want to plan it and test it. So, and we're here to help. So that's my final words. Philip, any final thoughts before we sign off?
I have no final words other than that these won't be the final words about Windows 10.
That is very
Expect
true.
More. Expect to keep
very
talking
true.
about it.
Very true. All right, thank you very much. Thanks, everyone, and the recording will be available in the next 24 hours.